Hi, welcome to Black Sox Global. We're here today to talk about the COVID crisis. My name is Lee Jasper. This is Vivamund, and we're co-hosting today's global broadcast. And we've got an assembly of activists a la carte supreme to give you their insights from around the world. First of all, as our guest, we have an activist who is an icon of the civil rights movement in the United States, somebody that I've known very well over the last few years, had a great relationship with, and I look up to as a political mentor, and that's the Reverend Al Sharpton, coming in straight from New York. So we're delighted to have Reverend with us. We also have Dr. Celia Perez from Brazil, Sao Paulo, who'll be talking about the biggest African diaspora community anywhere outside of the continent. Many people don't know that Brazil has so many Africans and they're being affected by this COVID virus. We also have Dr. Joy St. John from the Caribbean. And there's a story about effective government taking action against the lockdown that has prevented deaths. And she'll be talking to us as part of this conversation as well. And the Lord Simon Woolley, Sir Lord Simon Woolley. And we basically doff our heads to the majesty that is the Lord's. And he will be joining us. And I've got to say, somebody is a special treat for me to have on. I met him once in Uganda, and I've never forgotten him since. The Professor PLO Lumumba. If you've never heard of him, you're about to have your world changed by his presence here today.
Rare treat.
Rare treat. And that makes up our guest and international panel today. Well, of course, we're going to talk about the impact globally of the COVID virus. And we all know, just from the outset for context, that it is disproportionately impacting the very poorest, the most vulnerable, whether that's African American, whether that's Afro-Brazilians, whether that's African Caribbean communities here in the UK, in Europe, or on the continent. And as a consequence of that, I'm delighted really to ask each of our contributors to come forward and to make a contribution, giving us the background to the COVID impact in their respective countries, and talking about how we as an international diaspora can work better together to support each other and to protect the continent of Africa, which is susceptible and vulnerable both economically and socially. I'd like to start off by asking Reverend Al Sharpton to make his first and opening comments. Reverend, welcome again, and we're delighted to have you. Give us your thoughts and reflections on COVID crisis globally and in America.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me, and how honored I am to be a part of this discussion. I think that clearly in the United States, we have seen African Americans disproportionately impacted across several areas. One, we have been found more deemed positive with the coronavirus itself. Secondly, we have died more in most major cities at 3 to 4 times the rates of whites. Much of that is because of the health care and the health services in African communities in the United States are far inferior. Hospitals are further away from us. Trained medical facilities are not within our reach. And of course, the cost of health care is certainly something that we tried to deal with in the Obama administration, but is still limited. We also found that in the stimulus, there has been 2 stimulus packages put through, over $3 trillion. Less than 1% of those stimulus dollars went to Black-owned businesses. So much so to National Action Network, the group that I'm president of, was able to reach out and get Magic Johnson, the basketball star. He put up $100 million last Sunday to try and help some Black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. We've had over 5,000 applications. So we are the ones dying more, we are the ones with the worst health conditions, and we are the ones that are getting the least amount of money for recovery. This is, of course, uh, based on the systemic inequality that was already there. Coronavirus did not cause inequality. Coronavirus put Klieg lights to expose it, not only in the United States, but all over the diaspora. And the social policies of President Trump, the president of Brazil, president or prime minister in England, is reflected by the policies that have already been in place. I think as dire as the situations are, it also is the opportunity to organize, because in the destabilization of these countries, as they talk about coming back to what is normal, we must make sure that we make it clear normal didn't work for us. We weren't equal in normal. Normal meant we were doubly unemployed. Normal meant we had these archaic immigration laws. Normal meant law enforcement didn't have to respect us. We must organize and unite around the diaspora to create a new normal, a new economic package, a new World Health guards that we control the health and the repair of health in our communities. We must start conversations like this across the diaspora to rise up together to take control during this destabilization period that they do not know what they are going to do. We must be sure-footed. That is why I think that this discussion was so importantly to be a part of. That's why I'm so happy the professor's on, because we need to have our best thinkers come with the plans that we can all agree with and concretize and negotiate from a position of strength. All of these governments cannot pull through and survive now unless they have our voting bloc and our consumer power. And if we are strategic, we are at a place now, even as dire as it is, to really maximize some progressive movements.
Powerful. Thank you for that, Reverend Sharpton, and as usual, a succinct and comprehensive analysis of the issues facing not just African Americans, but indeed the international African diaspora, and the potentialities that this crisis, as dire as it is, brings for international compensation, I think have been well expressed. Bringing in now my dear professor friend, Professor PLO Lumumba. Dear sir, give us your reflections and thoughts on the international and domestic impact of COVID crisis.
It cannot be gainsaid that COVID-19 has had very grave impact in the continent of Africa. And when one looks at the gravity of COVID-19, one must understand it in the context of the preparedness of our health systems. Many African countries were very quick to impose lockdowns, which was a reaction that some may say was borrowed from Europe and America and China. But this is not the time to criticize, because people have been learning on the go, as it were. But what is important is that African governments have reacted in different ways. And it is critical to appreciate that the gravity of the virus has been appreciated by many governments. It can be argued that the testing has not been as robust as it ought to be. But we have seen that the reaction to COVID has been informed by the realities in different countries. So that if you took a survey of the 54 African countries, you will find that in South Africa, the approach has been very rigorous. The imposition of the lockdowns informed by the realization that COVID-19 was affecting everybody. And of course, the other thing is that the scientific research that had been undertaken was revealing that those with comorbidities were being affected and that COVID-19 was exacerbating the medical situation. But there are other countries which have taken different approaches. Tanzania, for example, Burundi, for example, have argued that African countries cannot afford lockdowns because the economic situation is such that if you lock down the economies, then the impact of hunger on those who survive on a day-to-day basis, or hand to mouth, as the cliche goes, would be much more grave than if it were locked down. But that notwithstanding, what has emerged courtesy of COVID-19 is that Africans have recognized that there are things that must be done. Our underbelly, particularly in the medical sector and in the health sector, has been revealed. Those who are familiar with Africa will know that several years ago in Abuja, Nigeria, African governments did agree that they would devote 15% of their budgets for the health sector. This has not happened, and when COVID came, it now became apparent that we couldn't afford masks, that we didn't have ventilators, that we didn't have ICU facilities. And the good thing now is that for the first time in the history of post-independent Africa, nobody is leaving the continent to seek medical attention elsewhere. And I think that many governments are recognizing that going forward, we must give the health sector the pride of place that it deserves. But the other thing, we talk about the opportunities that have emerged. We have seen, for example, the Malagasy Institute of Applied Science have come up with some intervention. Those who want to disparage Africa will simply dismiss it as a concoction. But from where I sit, this is innovation in its embryonic stages. I think that this has come about because of COVID and the realization that you must take care and charge of your affairs. We have also seen the Louis Pasteur Institute in Dakar in Senegal has demonstrated to us that within a very short time, you can innovate and have test kits which are affordable and sensitive to the realities of your continent. It is also instructive that for the first time in the history of the continent of Africa, the African Center for Disease Control based in Addis Ababa has now come alive. And you know that we have 5 such centers distributed in Egypt, in Gabon, in Kenya, in Zambia, and in Nigeria. And this is telling us that Africa can innovate. Outside of that, we have also seen that research institutes, including the Kenya Medical Research Institute and Zimbabwe Research Institute, are now beginning to recognize that we must have our own ways of intervention. In a nutshell, what one sees is a continent and a people that are beginning to recognize that going forward, you cannot continue to rely on others. I was very gladdened, for example, to read an article by the Nigerian professor Chukwuma Soludo, who was himself the former governor of Central Bank, Federal Reserve of Nigeria, saying that Africa cannot at this stage afford the luxury of myopic policy decisions because COVID is going to be with us for the long haul. And having recognized that that is the reality, how do we proceed? I see that we are in trouble, but we are in the right place in terms of identifying our priorities.
Thank you, brother. We'll definitely be coming back to you to hear some more, but we're conscious that the Reverend's on a tight time schedule, and we definitely want to hear from some of our other powerful speakers.
We spoke about the biggest African diaspora being in Brazil, and it's a delight to have Celia Perez, who's a doctor, a psychologist. Her degrees are endless. Her English is her second language, so bear with us during this. Simon, I know that you speak fluent Spanish. If you can assist in any way, feel free to. But let's hear from Dr. Celia Perez.
Thank you. I will read because English is not my first language. I'm grateful for the invitation. I will start by introducing myself as the daughter of Maria Celia and granddaughter of Maria Minervina and Maria Antonia. As you can see, Maria is a common name in Brazil. I will include some statistical data, mainly from government sources, Brazil has 211 million people, and the majority are Black. Even today, the social imaginary and relations are guided by the logic of a colonial configuration and racism, which here is wide open and naturalized. The Black population is in vulnerability with precarious conditions of health, work, income, study, affected by programmed actions of mass incarceration and other secular extermination policies. Another common name here is João. This week, João Pedro, aged 14, played with his cousins. The police broke into the house, shot with a rifle, took the boy, and only 17 hours later did the family find out where the boy was, or rather, his body. The next day, another João, João Vitor, 18, went out to buy a kite. Another policy action, another bullet hitting a João, another death. Every 23 minutes, a young Black man is murdered. For every João who is murdered, many mothers affected by the same violence. Marias, who later died of heart attacks, depressions, and other sequelae. And a whole population for centuries being affected in their bodies, knowledge, life perspectives, compromising the conditions of organic, psychic, collective, and integral health. A politician was investigating this genocide. It wasn't Maria, but Marielle. She was brutally murdered. We were all hit. One question remains unanswered for 2 years. Who ordered the killing of Marielle Franco? The current president is not João, but Jair Bolsonaro. He threatens democracy, encourages hatred against the Black population, Native peoples, progressive groups, and styles of emancipatory education. He tries to expel indigenous and quilombolas from their own lands. During the pandemic, he underestimates the disease and doesn't have a decent plan to control. He defends the economy at the expense of health. In poor communities where the majority are Black, basic sanitation is lacking in some regions, including water, as well as information services, space for social isolation, conditions for remote work, and income sources are precarious jobs interrupted during quarantine. There is a huge underreporting because testing is only for serious cases. The official figures for COVID-19 are 250,000 confirmed cases and 17,000 deaths. Data with virtual information begins to be collected in some cases. It's already possible to state that in São Paulo, the focus of the disease, hospitalizations and deaths of whites decreased and that of Blacks increased. Although there are more whites hospitalized, Blacks are 62% more likely to die. There is no biological influence related to the bodies of Black people, but the deprivation of rights and citizenship leads to unfavorable socioeconomic situations, and this in turn to impaired physiological conditions. There are losses that, despite being unnatural and perfectly preventable, are overrepresented, with repercussions on contamination, aggravated developments, difficult treatments, illnesses, and deaths. Some demands are adoption of the race cut in all data on testing, illness, and death, more testing and public beds, especially in the neighborhoods, basic income, not only emergency, in addition to health with equity, including comprehensive guarantee of the vaccine when it arrives. The Black and Native populations are not naturally risk groups in the war against COVID-19, but for centuries we have been a target group in the genocidal war on racism. And the intersection of wars is a serious risk to the survival of our bodies, knowledge, bones, and life projects, as well as our dignity. For centuries, violence has affected us. For centuries, we have resisted. The Black movement has been fighting for effective liberation, equal rights, and citizenship. It concurred extremely important laws regarding quotas in public universities and public competitions, Afro-Brazilian and indigenous history and culture at all levels of education, and integral health of the Black population. It's little.
I'm going to
Excuse me?
I'm going to stop you, pause you there for a moment, only because I know that the Reverend has to go. And I'd like to just get some discussion in. I know that you prepared a script, and we're going to make that available to everybody who's watching. You email it to us, we will make that available. And we'll come back to you for general discussion. So just hold that thought. But in relation, and Simon and St. Joy, we're coming to you. But before the Reverend goes, are there any questions, comments, or reflections that you heard, Reverend, you'd like to share with us before you have to leave?
It's gone.
It's gone. Okay, well, I thought that Reverend would not be able to stay long, and I was absolutely right in that, but we're delighted he was able to join us anyway. I'm going to ask you to carry on, Dr. Celia Perez. Do continue. I thought the Reverend would still be with us, but he's had to dash. So continue.
Thank you. It's little, very little, especially considering that they are not widely implemented. We have different entities, such as the one I am a part of, the UMA Institute Psyche and Blackness, which has been dedicated to the care and production of knowledge involving psychology, race, and gender relations for 25 years. We also have a Black Coalition for Rights, which brings together 150 entities and international articulations, and it's dedicated to political advocacy with the Brazilian state. The articulation of Brazilian Black women organizations is an example of another active social movement. One of the main guidelines has been health, which, according to the logic of Buen Vivir, is considered integral. A person can only be healthy if the people around and nature are also healthy. This means abandoning explorative and androcentric logic, discarding development and adopting involvement, sustainable ways of life and economy models, decolonizing knowledge, practices, and relationships. We want to transcend survival, live with dignity and the Buen Vivir. I end with a sentence by writer and intellectual Maria da Conceição Evaristo. They combined killing us, but we combined not die.
Well, thank you so much for that, and your English was to be commended.
Exceptional.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're very pleased you managed to get through that. We're going to move on quickly if we may, because we've got a lot to get through. We know Lord Simon Woolley has been listening intently to all of the contributions
from around the world, and we're inviting him now to make his contribution to this global. I'm so excited about this global discussion, man. Why hasn't this happened before? I don't know.
Well, Al Sharpton made the point that now's the right time.
Yeah.
And it's the beginning of a conversation. And just picking up on the point that Lee made at the beginning, it's Black Shocks initiated global event. It's the first of 5. We want to continue the conversation and drop down into some longer-term, longitudinal action. It's not just a headline show. And Simon, when we spoke earlier, said he'd be very succinct because less is more, so that we can break open a bit of an exchange and conversation before we move on to the next group. So go ahead, please, Simon.
Thank you, Brother Viv, and my brother Lee. First of all, I actually want to thank you two. I want to thank you two for bringing the African diaspora from 3 continents to this global discussion around a global pandemic that has rocked continents to their absolute core. Let's be clear about this. This has been the greatest challenge since that deadly Second World War so many years ago. And above all, I think what it's exposed is a global system of politics and commerce that has been laid bare for its fragility, for its gross racial discriminatory practices. that have been not only laid bare, but amplified. I guess the main question that confronts the African diaspora, and which historians in the future will write about, is this. They will look back and they will say, what did we do? What was our response to this pandemic? And I think, as has been outlined by many of the speakers, I guess there is two main things that I wish to cover very, very quickly. One is the dangers, and the other, as Reverend Sharpton said, is the opportunity. The danger in many of our countries is this, that we all know that people who look like us have been devastatingly impacted by this disease. In the UK, we are 4.2 times likely to die from COVID than anybody else. If you're a care worker looking after the elderly and sick, 30% of all those care workers have been from our communities. We've seen frontline workers, bus drivers, cleaners, all be massively affected. Here's the danger. There is a strong narrative from powerful people who will say this. They will look at the disproportionality of Black deaths and say, well, I'm sorry, the reason why you're dying in disproportionate numbers is frankly your own fault. It's because of your lack of immunity. It's because of your underlying health elements. It's because of your cultural practices while we're having these. In effect, they will be saying it's your fault, not ours. There's a big headline in one of the national newspapers here, written by an eminent doctor, Dr. Tony Sewell, who said this: it is not structural racism. It is not structural racism that's causing the disproportionality of Black deaths in this country. That was the headline. The danger is, if we do not take control of the narrative, we, in effect, will be blamed. Here's the opportunity. If we do take control of the narrative across these three continents and make a strong demand, we must say this, as the Dr. Perez said, it is nothing to do with our biological DNA whilst we're dying. It is the structural inequalities laid bare by this disease, in which the disease itself does not target race, but targets those racialized areas of our society: work, employment, health, education, and it's laid them bare. Coming out of this, and bearing in mind now, as we come out of the imminent danger, the life and death situation, we will be facing an economic downturn, the likes of which we haven't seen for 300 years. Our continents from every country in the African diaspora must come together to a central demand to have a COVID-19 race equality strategy.
Beautiful.
I'll finish on this. One question. Out of this awfulness, we must build something special. This is our time.
Beautiful.
Well, our Africanness and our Blackness is our pre-existing condition, is what I take from that, and the urgency of global connectivity. Professor Lumumba, what's your reflections on what you've heard so far? He's clearly not heard me. Professor Lumumba, can you hear us, comrade? Well, we're going to continue. Professor Perez or Doctor. You can hear us now. He can't hear me. Okay, let me go to Celia Perez. From Brazil, we're getting a lot of online support for your inclusion in today's discussion. And I know that Brazil constitutes the 21st century equivalent of a South African cultural apartheid nation. People out there will not know how badly Africans in Brazil are treated. Tell us some more about that.
Theo.
Okay. Yes, we are the second country in number of the Black people in the planet. The first is Nigeria, and we are the second. And even with this number, despite this number, we are in the worst places in the society. And this is not coincidence. This is not, this is a plan that our government during the centuries are doing to the extermination, the genocide of us. And the genocide is not only in the bodies. Each body die culture, history, and our dreams, and our capacity to dream with a beautiful future. And we need this alliance. We need fight together, and we need put our force and our souls in this fight, because it's not fair, this situation, and we want to be here, and our wisdom and our history, and we are building this country for centuries, and then it's fair that we can sharing the results here and throughout the planet.
Can I just say, just so we can get a bit of an exchange here, I know many people watching this show this evening will be speechless and overawed by the figures that you've shared with us regarding the numbers of Black people in Brazil. They don't know that it has the biggest diaspora. And so we're going to pick this up and move forwards with it. We're definitely going to want to focus down on Brazil and what's happening there. And we know that you're going to aid us in doing so. Many of your colleagues around the world are reinforcing what you're saying, as Lee said. Definitely caught the conversation of fire. We've got Lord Simon Woolley, who's championing here in the UK, and we'll definitely be collaborating with that. Al Sharpton, unfortunately, was only on for a short time, but he made it clear again that we're going to need to work together across the continents in order to bring about the change that we want to see. It's a real shame. It's a travesty that so many Black people have died globally. But out of it has come this conversation that we're going to build on. So we thank you once again, Sister, most definitely, Lord Simon and the Reverend Sharpton. We want to very quickly hear some closing points from the Professor before we move on to the next group who are waiting to come in to the room. Professor, please, some closing words on what you've heard so far.
Can you hear me there?
Yes, sir. We know you've missed some of what has been said, but can you just share some closing words with us? The consensus at the moment is that we pick this up as the beginning of a conversation and collaboration in order to move things forward globally.
We continue to have some technical challenges in the Professor hearing the conversation. No doubt interference from the usual suspects. So I think that with great respect to all, we're going to close out this panel. We'll come back to, listen, on all of you, I think all of you deserve one-to-one interviews. Yes. So we may be back with each one of you to say, let's deep dive a little further. But for now, from this glorious international African diasporic panel, can I say thank you on behalf of myself, Black Sox and Viva Moon, solidarity. And you are not alone. We stand with you. And we'll be talking to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Well, wow. I don't know what to say. It's a fantastic discussion. And you can see by the comments. Please do share with other people. Let them know this conversation taking place because it's one of a kind.
Absolutely. It's been led by Black Sox. It's what we do. We facilitate conversations where wanting the leadership to come together, whether it be domestically in the UK or globally, it's critically important that we operate in a unified way in order to get the outcomes that we say we want. So that's really important point that we're going to hear being made over and over again during this conversation, no doubt.
Yep.
I want to bring in the next panel because, not surprisingly, we're running slightly behind time with all of these heavyweights on the show. So who have we got in next? We've got our dear friends, David Weaver. There you go, with a beautiful black jacket and white shirt. We've got Judge Peter Herbert, who I like to refer to as our hybrid. He's in Kenya and also in the UK at the same time, almost omnipresent. Who else have we got?
No idea.
Sister
Sandra.
Dr. Sis Sandra Richards.
Yeah.
Another powerful hybrid in the UK and across the Caribbean. Amazing. And it's really, from our standpoint, it's a real pleasure to be connecting back up with you. And we've got Izzy, who again is another hybrid.
Izzy Obeng.
Yeah, based in both
Ghana,
the UK and Ghana.
Is she there? No. Okay. All right, let's continue with the panel as it is. Welcome, Sister Sandra. I haven't seen you for such a long time. The other guys, can you just wait a minute while I just talk to my sister Sandra? Peter, it's a delight to see you in Kenya, looking gloriously regal, I must say, in your gold, Ashanti gold, I hope.
Well, we have to try. You have to try.
You're knocking it out of the park, son. Yes. And David Weaver, chair of the Coalition of Race Equality Organisations UK, and
otherwise known as CORE,
president, no less, of the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. Well, you've heard some of the discussion we've had today, so I invite you to give your opening remarks. And it's ladies first on this occasion.
But let's hasten to add, we don't want speeches. We prefer to open it up as a conversation. So maybe some reflections on what you've heard so far and some points from yourselves so that we can get a bit of an exchange here. It's like a meze. We're giving everyone who's listening an opportunity to hear what's going on, where we're coming from, an opportunity for them to sign into info@blacksocks.com to get information about the activities that are taking place in between these global conversations. So over to you, sister.
Greetings, can you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and clear and perfect vision.
Okay. First of all, I have to congratulate you on bringing together your esteemed speakers and really joining up the African conversation across borders. This is an amazing feat. So let me first of all do that. I know we're pushed for time, so I just wanted to share my initial response to what I heard. Viewers may know that I am an African-centered educator. I am a member of the African family, and that's why sister goes before my title doctor. It is important to me that we recognize that we are in a war. It's very difficult for some of us to understand that, but what I was hearing from our esteemed speakers is almost an echo, the same thing, different words, but the same thing is happening to the African family. We are disproportionately negatively impacted by policies, legislation. We are seen as being property, chattel. We come off the worst when it comes to social policies. And health is something that's come up repeatedly. Now, when it comes to health, we have to think not only of our physical health, but also our mental health, our spiritual health. We need to recognize that we are more than just our physical beings. And what I was hearing from our speakers was this onslaught, this continuous attack. And it is very familiar to me because but a few hundred years ago, some of what is happening now was happening. Different names, same people. We are disproportionately affected. People are funded in our name to offer us support, education, housing, and use our name to offer up some idea of what the solution is. So when I listen to...
Can I just say, because again, I want us to have a conversation and tease out some of the key points. Now, the title of this whole evening's event is After Lockdown. And a lot of the conversation at the moment is to do with the mental health, the trauma and the fallout that we're going to see over the next few years. In fact, over a generation. Are there any specific points you want to add to that?
I think that
how do you deal with it?
How do we deal with it? Right, okay. I'm just getting a bit of a delay on what you're saying. I think one of the things that we have to do is to recognize that we have to be part of the solution. This is an ideal opportunity, and I think Reverend Sharpton spoke to that. We have to create a new normal. And what this situation has done is provided for us a portal to be in an awakening. We are having an awakening as a people across the planet. And we have to have the conversation about what the solutions are and how they are applied. It needs to be something that engages us properly, not just in terms of pointing to us as the people who are disproportionately affected, but we are also the people who know what the solution is. The past normal cannot be the new normal.
Okay, beautiful. Well, on that point, past normal cannot be the new normal. Let us bring in the judge and hear what the judge has got to say. The judge, still the judge at the moment? Is that, Peter, is that correct?
Yeah, just about. But I just wanted to pick up, thank you firstly for having me on, and I'll try and be brief in a couple of minutes, introductory remarks. What I want to do is just to step back and on a personal note, just say that this is personal to all our people. Myself, my Auntie Maud is 90 years old, had COVID-19, survived. My sister is a consultant pediatrician in Sunderland, working on the front line. My cousin had it, is a legal aid practitioner in London, legal aid lawyer of the year, caught this. So on a practical basis, all of our families, all of our people have been directly affected. So from that humbling perspective, I say thank you, a huge thank you to all the people of color all over the world who are saving lives. And they're not saving lives just in the basis of their own people, it's everybody. And I think that's an important point that needs to be remembered, that we are the first in a sense that will lay down our lives.
Information across the screen.
That's a beautiful point there, sir. Can you just touch on, given your expertise, touch on the legal side of it, the police, enforcement, and human rights?
Yes, I mean, it's different viewed on where you are. You know, if you're Dominic Cummings and you have a 260-mile trip twice to County Durham to supposedly visit your parents, then end up in a beauty park, then you may be able to escape and say your work as an advisor to the Prime Minister is absolutely essential. If, however, you're unfortunate enough to be a person who was caught before the lockdown, before the curfew, at around about 6 o'clock on the ferry in Mombasa, then you would be generally, you would have had a very heavy beating from very over-enthusiastic and out-of-control police officers. On the other hand, you know, in many parts of the world, there were law enforcement officers all over the continent who showed great kindness in Kenya as well, and generosity getting people home on time. So human rights is something that cannot be put to one side. And to give you one practical example, the Law Society of Kenya challenged the government's lockdown and said that lawyers should be essential workers and allowed to travel after hours. They won that part of the case. They didn't win the part where they argued that the curfew itself was unlawful. The High Court of Kenya held it was constitutionally correct. But they did come down on police excesses and brutality, which added nothing to countering the pandemic. And I think one of the things that is common, I'll close on this, all over the world, is the appalling hate crime killing that we saw on our screens, and the very slow prosecution of those white men responsible is a lesson to us all that despite the common enemy of the pandemic, old enemies still manifest themselves. And whether it's the treatment, the abusive treatment by Chinese government of African nationals in China, or indeed on the continent in having an apartheid system in their restaurants, we have all lessons to learn from the human rights perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Scholarly and laser-like as usual. So, David, can you add just around the trauma and the mental health piece? I mean, I learned yesterday that the government has set aside £750 million to offset the tsunami that they expect in relation to the trauma and the distress that's been experienced by people in the country. I wonder how much of that money is going to come to our communities, and to an extent, I wonder to what extent it's going to be impacting our brothers and sisters globally who won't be seeing anything like that kind of resource being invested to meet their needs. So
I think that just before Dave comes in, I as a remind the panelists, it's a global discussion. So we have people from Kenya, Brazil, Africa, and around the world. And although the particularities of Britain are super important to us all here, the reality is they won't know what the hell we're talking about unless we have a broader global analysis. So before you come in.
And this is a global conversation.
Thank
you, Lee.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I don't have to say thank you again to both of you for organizing this, and to our esteemed speakers who have done so much for fighting for justice and equality around the world, for everybody, but not least for Black people and so-called people of color. I would just echo what was said by Sister Sandra. This is a serious thing. People are dying. We're 4 times more likely to die. There's research taking place all over the place, and people seem to be investing in the research. But the bit that we know is that we are being disproportionately impacted, and that is having an impact on our mental health. So you mentioned the point around money's been put aside for mental health. What we do know is the government treats mental health funding as they've done in the past, is that we're not going to get the funds. You know, the paradox is this. The paradox is that it is our communities that are going to be disproportionately impacted and traumatized, as if it's not happening already. But if you know anything about trauma, and victims of Grenfell and their families will know this, is that there's a delay, and it comes 6 months, year, 2 years down the road. So we've seen absolutely nothing yet. But we have that disproportionality that the government will not fund unless we campaign to ensure that they're culturally appropriate therapeutic services for our communities. And if that doesn't happen, we're in trouble. So there's never present danger, really. We have to be campaigning for that. Other factors as well, as we ease out of the lockdown. I mean, someone said to me yesterday that it's okay for mainstream society, because the paradox is that when you look at disproportionality, it impacts on our community. And as we ease out of the lockdown, we are the ones that are going to be impacted because of the nature of our jobs, nurses, carers, bus drivers, taxi drivers. It's going to be impact on us. So this is a really, really serious conversation. And I'll just end with this because it's a conversation here. Simon is absolutely right, because the big narrative is that it's genetics. Now, Professor Fenton, who is the person leading on the Public Health England inquiry, was absolutely emphatic in saying that it's not the genetics. We are not to blame. The narrative about we, the people that are campaigning about it, dealing in victimhood, is a narrative that's spreading. So the last point here is that we have to do it, but we also have to hold our institutions to account. I'm president of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. It's the largest association of counsellors and psychotherapists in the world. And I'm putting that to them, that we have to ensure that we're targeting culturally appropriate therapy, Black therapists, Black counsellors, Black psychologists that understand the trauma that we are facing.
Well, that's thanks for that contribution. And again, I say that, you know, we're having a global conversation. So what we're talking about therapeutic needs here in the United Kingdom are simply life and death issues on the continent, or other issues in Brazil, or other issues in the Caribbean. And talking about the Caribbean, who in some ways have got an exemplar for the West of maybe how to handle it. And maybe Dr. Joyce and John can come in and provide us with some insight on how the Caribbean has been managing to manage the COVID crisis so far.
So thank you very much. I am the executive director of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, and the Caribbean has managed this by watching it very carefully. From January 4th, we started working with the chief medical officers in the Caribbean. And what we realized quickly was that we had to manage this as a health security issue. And CARFA, the Caribbean, that's what we call ourselves, CARFA, worked with the security cluster of the Caribbean community. And first of all, we had the coordination with other sectors through SEDIMA. We had JRCC track persons from countries of interest as they came on airplanes into the Caribbean. We also had the regional security system using its air wing to help us bring samples to CARFA. And what we have found is that that coordination, that working together is what has saved us. And we have also had to realize that although we are not a continent, although CARFA has 26 member states, and some of them are continental, like Belize, Guyana, and Suriname, most of the rest are small island developing states. We came to grips with the fact that we don't have many people. Our people are our greatest resource. And so while the public health, because we have very strong public health principles and action, while the public health measures were put in place, that is the contact tracing, quarantining, isolation, and treatment, there was also the multi-sectoral whole of government, whole of society agreement to get those lockdowns. And I put it that way because our region is heavily dependent on tourism. And so we have had, along with success in saving lives, we have also had economic downturns of significant proportions. And so our work together is even more critical as we come out of the first wave. Look at the best ways to start interregional travel, and then look to a safe way of returning to tourism. So what the Caribbean has done is we have decided that we have to live with COVID-19, because although this is a marathon, it's being run at sprint pace. So we have been working on the protocols that allow safe living with COVID until we have access to both treatments and vaccines. So what we're working on now is protocols for living with COVID, and also protocols which will allow us to have as safe a return incrementally to tourism as possible.
That's going to be a significant challenge for the Caribbean. It's going to be a significant challenge, not least because the European nations are requiring people to have periods of 14-day quarantine when they are leaving and coming back into the country. And I think that will have a depressive effect on the extent of international tourism. But we're delighted to hear the efforts of the Caribbean to make sure that its economies remain viable as we go forward into this discussion.
Absolutely echoed that, Lee. And I think a couple of points has come out of your presentation, sister. There's one, the marathon, and it's actually one of the terms we used when we initially launched Black Sox back in 2015. You know, we have to take a long-term strategic view in relation to this pandemic and the systemic and underlying dysfunction that we've had to deal with for so many centuries. The fact that our people are our resources, again, a very important point that we're really pushing on as far as Black Sox is concerned. For those who, many people are putting into the chat room about how they get involved and what comes next. We're not interested in just putting on chat shows and events for the sake of it. There's a whole range of strategic stuff, partnership related stuff taking place with all of the people that you've seen on the screen this evening. If you want to be involved in that, if you've got resources to contribute, because the Black Sox does everything for itself, it doesn't beg money from anyone. That's not to say we're not interested in our tax dollars, but we have to be self-determining and realizing our vision for ourselves. So if you are interested, please do go to the website, the www.blacksocks.com. It's running along the bottom of the screen. And from there, put your details in our room and we will be coming back to you. So we're going to move quickly on. I think the professor's still here, Professor Lumumba. So maybe we can get him on very, very, very quickly for some closing points from Africa, East Africa in particular. Brother, hopefully we can get you through now.
Yeah, the line is not very clear, so I've not followed much of the conversation. But if I am to speak to the theme and to react to some of the comments that have been made, I would say that a number of things have happened, and this is the time that really we must stop agonizing. I think we have agonized for too long, and what we need to do is to organize and to work together. And my view is that there are quite a number of opportunities that now present themselves in the chosen areas of education, health, employment, innovation, trade, technology, and collaboration between Africans in the mother continent and those in the diaspora. I think the opportunity is now for those of you who are out there to organize yourselves in an institutionalized manner so that we engage with existing African institutions. They may be weak as we speak, but they can be strengthened. So if we talk about improving the health sector, it is instructive that while I hear my brethren in the Caribbean, in Brazil, and in the continent of America talking about the plight of the Black people, it must also be appreciated that the virus apparently for the moment does not appear to be as virulent in the continent of Africa as it has been in America or in Europe, which is a good thing, but which is also a warning to us that we ought to be prepared a lot more going forward. Secondly, I want to say that we must learn to trade with ourselves, and trade means that we must now begin to ensure that we add value to the things that we produce in the mother continent so that we don't rely on China and the United States and Europe. And thirdly, we must also get into the arena of research. We appreciate now that in the pharmaceutical sector, even when medicine is discovered, it's the big 15 from Europe and America that will be dictating what we have as vaccines. So because time does not allow, permit me therefore to say that opportunities do exist, and those opportunities must be seized through collaboration. And if we collaborate, then I think there are a lot of things that we can do. Very lastly, it is instructive that the African Union, in the month of July, will be operationalizing the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to be based in Accra, Ghana. What are the opportunities that we can identify and seize post-COVID? And I'm using the word post-COVID very guardedly because in my view, COVID will be with us for a long time to come. It is post-lockdowns. What will we do? And I think there are many things that we can do working together, as I've already stated. I think it suffices to say that because time does not allow me to have the luxury of saying all the things that deserve to be said.
Thank you, brother. We're definitely going to come back to you for a deep dive conversation. I've already put my marker in with you. I'm sure Lee and I are going to fight over who actually does the interview. And we'll definitely be doing exactly the same thing with our colleagues from across the world so that people can access that information in detail. So much information is soundbited nowadays, and we're actually looking for the deep dive information and the collaboration and connecting up, which is exactly why we've collected up our family over the globe this evening. So thank you all once again for sharing. Dr. Sandra Richards, Lee.
Yes, Dr. Judge Peter Herbert from Kenya, David Weaver, President and Chair of CORE, as well as Dr. Joy St. John, and the esteemed Professor Lumumba. We thank you all for joining us today. And the one thing that we will say is that the unity needed to ensure the point that Professor Lumumba made, that the big pharmaceutical industries do not colonize and privatize the vaccine in relation to a treatment, is going to be a global effort amongst us. And the opportunities for that global, the African free trade market are going to mean it's time for the international diaspora to begin to work with those African institutions to realize the true potential of the African continent, so that all Black people of African descent can walk tall wherever it is they may be on the planet.
Thank you, Lee. Very succinct and comprehensive as normal, as usual. Thank you, everybody, and we'll definitely be coming back to you, as we've said. For everybody that's listening, we're getting some really great comments coming in. There's a lot of emphasis on the need for us to take it forward and collaborate. That's exactly what we intend to do. Please, we don't want you to be armchair activists. You need to sign up so that we've got your details so we can pass the information on to you, and tithe in some of your resources, some of your time. It doesn't always have to be money, so that we can genuinely work with each other going forwards. So quickly, we should go to the next and our last group of contributors this evening. We have Ray Banton coming in, beautiful brother. We have Jermaine Jackman. We have Izzy Obeng. And we have David McQueen.
Do you? You don't have David McQueen.
David McQueen not here at the moment. Hopefully he will materialize. I did speak to him not 2 hours ago. So why don't we start?
You've lost Izzy. Keep going.
Why don't we start with Jermaine Jackman, very politically aware and active, and also straddling the entertainment industry as well. Why don't you open up on what you've heard this evening, Jermaine? I mean, I hasten to add. Oh, there's David McQueen, looking calm and relaxed as usual. Okay. You just keep us on tender hooks. And then I was calling you.
I couldn't get in.
Fashion.
Fashion. There were too many people in. They didn't want. I wasn't VIP. I wasn't good enough.
We had to have security. Such an elite conversation.
Fashionably late.
Yes.
Fashionably late.
So now look, we don't want we've had some really powerful presentations this evening. This group, I'm really, it's the group I identify with on a day-to-day basis, because you're about the money, the culture, and the fourth industrial revolution. And Izzy's definitely going to come in on that in terms of tech, incubators, accelerators. And we've got to think about what's going to happen with our community going forwards economically. It's been touched on by some of our other speakers. So let me open up with Jermaine Jackman, sir.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. You guys can hear me clearly?
Beautiful, sir, beautiful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for organizing this amazing event. Something like this has never been done before. And it's amazing that you're bringing the conversations of 3 different continents into one digital space. So congratulations, and thank you guys so much for doing that. Alongside being a student studying politics, I also chair a commission which captures the lived experiences of children and young people. And I thought that it'd be pressing, given the climate that we're currently in, that we organize COVID conversations with the mayor of Hackney, where I live. And what I'm hearing from young people is that not only are the government measures infringing on their civil rights, so a lot of stop and searches and some of the joys that young people would like, for example, going to parks and activities, are no longer available. We need to think about, okay, how can young people now access certain things online? And a lot of conversations are now being had around digital poverty, things that we already knew about, but families are now struggling to weigh up, okay, what am I going to spend the now squeezed income I have, and what am I going to put it in towards? Is it going to be Wi-Fi, rent, food? And Wi-Fi will tend to be the first thing to go. Implications to education and employment. These are long-term things long-term issues that are going to affect young people. Young people are talking about, well, I've missed a term of education. How am I going to get back into school to sit my exams? That's not fair. This government, the UK government, is talking about opening schools on the 1st of June and exams are going to be sat in July. How is that going to be possible? Young people are talking about having that mental health support as well, losing family members, losing friends to COVID-19, and what support is going to be out there for them. And I think for me, looking forward to the future, a lot of the conversations have been around the new normal. I actually challenge that, and I think it should be a better normal. Al Sharpton and other speakers have spoken about that the normal didn't work for us, didn't work for the ones with the short straw. So how can we work towards a better society? And I think that young people being able to upskill and be turned into entrepreneurs, so we can somehow find how we can benefit from post-COVID society. How can we benefit from gentrification in some of our areas in London, but also in America and parts of Africa as well? So it's like, how do we build a better society where young people and the marginalized voices and the communities that tend to get pushed aside and ignored, how can we start to benefit and grow and work towards a more equal, fairer society?
Okay, well, there's some powerful contributions there from Jermaine Chapman. I expect no less from you, young sir. Going over now to Izzy Obeng. Again, another powerful voice in this new conversation about the construction of a new world. And I don't think that's overly ambitious. I think what we've heard from people of the 3 continents, that there's a paradigm shift taking place. And what was previously the 20th century dimension of politics and activism is now no longer sufficient for the world challenge. And it'll be people of your age group who will be taking this forward. Izzy, so do give us your contribution.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's been such an incredible conversation. Hearing distinguished leaders in our community talk about the challenges that coronavirus is going to bring to our communities wherever they are. When it comes to the business sector, our young men and our women have been left behind by an economy that is increasingly becoming digital. It's been increasingly dominated by companies who are able to adapt to technology, adapt to changes in how we work. And if we are not educating our young people in how to navigate this digital technology space, if we are not helping them build financial inclusion and understand what it takes to start their own businesses, now their jobs are becoming more insecure globally because of tech, then we're in trouble. In the UK, where I used to live, I'm now based in Ghana, but in the UK, technology accounts for much of the productivity growth that's happened over the last 2 decades, 184 billion to the UK economy, and that's growing constantly. Yet we're finding that less than 1 in 10 of the people who lead our digital enterprises come from Black communities. And why is that? Our young people are more likely to be in poorly paid, low-income jobs. They're more likely to be in the frontline jobs where they're more at risk of contracting coronavirus. They're more likely to have underlying health conditions which make it harder to fight the virus. But crucially, they're less likely to have the skills and the competencies required to pivot their careers or change the nature of their work in order to adapt to the economy that will come after COVID-19 when we're all trying to rebuild. I'm not trying to say this in a way that is negative. I'm trying to say this in a way that shows that there is a huge opportunity coming up. We're seeing the challenges, we're talking about it. And Lee, I think you'll agree with me that this isn't a talking shop. This is a solutions-focused conversations. We've got all of these people who will come into our economy now who have these challenges that I've mentioned. And now is the time for us to come together to build new enterprises, new digital enterprises, because we're no longer limited by physical space. You can build an app that can reach people in Brazil, can reach people in Kenya, wherever they are. And so that's a huge part of my work. And a huge part of my work is how we design community-led approaches to upskilling our communities, how we explore the creation of digital tech ventures which are scalable, which can get the investment we need to grow our economies, and fundamentally how we make our economy more inclusive. So I can have a son or a daughter one day who can see tech as an industry that they can go into and feel comfortable growing and innovating within that space. We need to reimagine the way that we upskill adults as well, our parents, our families who may not have the skills at the moment to contribute to a new digital economy. So we need to build businesses that actually inevitably can grow our societies wherever they are once COVID-19 has passed. And I look forward to having that conversation with other panelists.
Beautiful. Look, I spoke to Izzy, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, over Zoom, and I was just so excited to be in a conversation with this young woman, because, you know, she literally is walking in her innovation and in her vision. We definitely are going to be working with her going forwards, both here and on the continent. I mean, we're already established in Uganda and Kenya with Peter Herbert, the Kafiro Foundation. We've got the Power Next event in November. It won't necessarily be physical in the way that we wanted it, but it will most definitely be virtual. So technology is key for IR, but also the 5IR aspect to it. How do we bend technology to work for our communities rather than have technology put us out of work and further away from mainstream? So very, very powerful points highlighted there by Izzy. She said community-led. That's Black Sox language right there. Community-led, community-driven. I want to just say again, the people keep asking how they can get involved. The Black Sox website is running along the bottom. In fact, it's being repurposed at the moment, COVID-19 styly, but the email address is up there, so you can go straight into the email address, and we will come to you and make you aware of how you can contribute to this, as Jermaine has already said, Lee, historic moment where we're coming together as Black people globally. I've always described myself as global African.
No, never locally Black, always internationally African.
Well, look, let's bring in, I'm going to bring in Ray Banton, because you see, for me, Ray is so important, because many of the more powerful movements over the years, Lee was always honored me about this, has been driven by our culture, music and art. Got a big art campaign going on in your iconic Brixton at the moment.
That's right. 81 acts of exuberance, celebrating the 81 uprisings in Lambeth. But Ray, over to you, my friend.
Well, I mean, just setting the scene. I mean, for many of our local businesses and people who are in the entertainment and health and well-being groups, because there's no events, there's no place, there's no places, there's no locations that we can hold events. So we are really struggling in terms of planning for our business and when it's going to start again as well as. So are we planning for 6 months? Are we planning for 12 months? Are we planning for 18 months? Nobody seems to know. In the meantime, many of our businesses are falling between the gaps in terms of business support, tax support, or even getting loans, because they're small businesses. They don't generate that income to have that amount of tax return to get help. So now they're looking at a different way they're looking at how are they going to work? How in the future can they do that? It is very frightening. It is very strange for them. But it's one that I think for us as a community that, you know, we're going to have to embrace going forward and work together to kind of work out how and where are we going to begin to find out. I like what one of the panelists said in terms of the better normal for us as a business. We are already disproportionately find it hard to access clubs. I think there's only about 2 or 3 Black clubs that we own that I know of, to my knowledge, in London. We use those clubs at the moment, but I don't know if they're going to be there when we come back, because they already find it hard to train and trade and to get an income. So for us, that's going to be an issue of where we can actually put on events of music for people of color. It's going to be very hard for us in terms of the model, in terms of our e-com. What is a viable business model after this pandemic going to be? As far as we're aware, and that we're looking at, the clubs may go up, prices of drinks may go up, everything will go up. Security might go up. We may need to take out insurance more so than we need to do. Our club's going to want to have us in there in such large numbers because of the COVID, and because the narrative is that Black people are more susceptible to that. Are they going to want to employ us? So that's another narrative coming out. It's it's a bit of confusion, but for many of the promoters, the event promoters, the business club owners that I'm talking to, we're kind of looking at a new way to embrace technology. So, for instance, Zoom has been very interesting for us. Many of our younger groups might have accessed that, but many of the older mature adults did not access that. They were afraid of technology. We put on Zoom events where we had people turning up, where we played music, but we had the whole family in there for some instance. In some instances, we've had people who have social distance alone, so they haven't even really seen anybody engage with their community over the last six to 7 weeks. So for us, it's very interesting time. I think looking at a positive out of this, people have almost been fast forwarded 2 or 3 years with technology for our community, young and old, especially the older ones who have had to kind of embrace it to have that community feel. I do get that community feel when I'm on social platforms. And
Great. I just want to step in there, and I think you're right. It is a positive time, as others have been said. It's an opportunity for us to, as Izzy said, pivot. And I mean, you've touched on very eloquently the domestic scene in the UK, and I want to just push back a little bit by saying it's also an opportunity for those in your industry in the UK to actually aggressively connect globally, because that's been the theme for this whole show. To really think about connecting globally as far as the music scene's concerned and the cultural scene's concerned. We know traditionally our music's been too controlled by the conceptual West. It is an opportunity to break that out. Yes, people are fast forwarding on the technology. Let them fast forward and connect globally, and hopefully you'll be part of what, well, I know you will be, because you've been pushing on that, getting all of the key people in the UK together and then getting them in turn to connect globally. There's a massive music scene, African music scene in South America, and obviously on the African continent, and in the Caribbean and elsewhere. So I think all your points are really important ones, and I'm adding that one to the mix. Let's move very quickly to David McQueen, the leadership guru. He and I fight over that title from time to time. He's also established a very powerful, very discreet group of rising influencers within the Black corporate sector in the UK and increasingly elsewhere. I'm interested, and like myself, David's very passionate about finance, because we can't do anything without the financial resources needed to establish and invest in our businesses, as Izzy's already said. And he's very, very, very passionate about technology. So David, share your thoughts with us, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Firstly, I'm proud to be in the group with Izzy. No offense to Jermaine and Ray, but if I'm on I've got all the feels up in here. Just quickly, I just want to, obviously because of time, I just want to lay out a couple of points from my point of view. And I think one of the key things here is about how as a community do we embrace leadership? And I'm not just talking about titles. I'm talking about how across the public, private, third sector, and in our communities, how do we demonstrate leadership? How do we learn leadership? And how do we bring people on board? Because we're going to need leadership in this new era that comes along. And one of the things that really stands out for me is how we, as a group, collectively define what being Black or Pan-African is. Because a lot of my work takes me into corporations where people are very quiet or very reluctant to talk about their Pan-African or Blackness. On the continent, when you're talking about across sub-Saharan Africa, or in many instances in North America, they're a lot more open and proud about it. But in the UK, people tend to be a bit more quiet about that. So one of my concerns is, if we're going to move this forward, how do we get a collective narrative and message around what that Blackness looks like? And for me, the next part of that is, once we've defined that, is being able to go, okay, now we know what that is. What are the areas of well-being that affect us as Black people? So our intellectual, our emotional, our spiritual, our financial, our work, our family relationships, our social, all these things, and our nutrition and well-being. How can we make sure that we're leading self as well as demonstrating to the community? How can we lift each other up in terms of our immunity, in terms of our financial strength, in terms of our business? What are the things that can be done from there? The last 2 points I want to be able to say very quickly are that we need to understand about distributed leadership. I get myself in a lot of trouble for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think a lot of the elders need to understand that we need to move out of the way for a lot of youngers who are coming with through very innovative ideas, whether it's around tech, whether it's around community, whether it's around finance. Allow them and nurture them and make sure that they can stand on our shoulders rather than thinking we've got to stay there like some dictator to the last end of our days before they can come in. So distributed leadership is really important. And by that, I mean, it's also important to think globally, but act locally. And I think, Viv, you made the point about being able to reach out across the diaspora. But very often, I know people who have been educated in the UK and North America, they think that they can go to these countries and tell everybody what they need to do. We need to learn to listen very well, but share what we can do with those with the communities across the diaspora and learn from each other. And the last one, which I think is very important, whether it's around technology, whether it's around business, whether it's around the community, we have to have outcomes. And what I mean by that is when you think about any business, when you think about any organization, when you think about any movement, within 6, 9, 12 months, they've always got outcomes. They've always got KPIs. They always have leaders who goes, right, this is our vision. And within a year, this is where we're going to reach. Or in 6 months, this is where we're going to reach. And there are lots of conversations that are already happening. And I'm really fortunate enough to have those conversations and learning and, you know, across LinkedIn and across all WhatsApp and all these other platforms, there are lots of really good conversations that are already happening. But for me, if we're really going to take it forward, collectively, we need to know what it means to be Black and Pan-African and have a consensus around that narrative. Let's think about making sure that the leadership is distributed. And lastly, let's make sure that we have solid outcomes, which we hold each other accountable to in the 6, 9 or 12-month period that we're actually talking about.
Beautiful, David, succinct as always. And when you're a performer, aren't you? So you had to come in under the radar as far as your delivery is concerned, and you did so. And so thanks to all the presenters and Ray, beautiful, and I'm looking for my freebie soon, even if it's virtual, into one of your events. And you're very eclectic in terms of, you know, the kinds of events you put on and you support. So, you know, I'll continue to celebrate the work that you're doing. Izzy, I'm very much looking forward to the work that I think we're going to do collaboratively through Black Men for Change, which is a Black men's network that's pan-London and aiming to be pan-global, just in terms of getting Black men working collaboratively and collegially together. Jermaine Jackman, an enigma. What a beautiful voice you've got, sir. We should have had you, you know, serenade us out actually, but maybe next time. Again, very politically active and very serious. You were the first person to purposefully make reference to our young people. They are our future, and we have to be setting a tone for them. And I think we've done so this evening in this very tight and very informative program. Last but not least, or have I covered everybody? I have, haven't I?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, I've done everyone. So look, thank you all.
No, you haven't, but it's okay.
Sorry?
You haven't done David.
You did it first.
I did it greedy. I'm joking. Greedy. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you. So Lee.
Great panel.
And we've come in with 7 minutes to spare for you and I.
And I normally eat up space.
I'm surprised you gave me so much. So
yeah.
What are the key points?
Well, I think that there's definitely a global conversation to be had.
Yeah.
I think the monetization and the digitization of Africa, the coming together of the African Union and a free trade agreement area, the requirement of tackling international debt of African and Caribbean countries, the impact upon the COVID virus on the international African diaspora around the world and on the continent means that this conversation is long overdue.
Yeah.
You know, Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican Pan-Africanist, would have been enormously proud of the kind of conversation he was facilitating in the 1920s through our printed paper, and that we're bringing about using new technology. Yeah. And I think that what we see is the potential for realizing both the potential of the international African diaspora, which is replete with talents unrecognized in America and in the United Kingdom, and also the massive, huge potential of the continent itself, which stands as a potential liberator, not just for the masses on the African continent who are living on less than $2 a day, but indeed for the international diaspora itself. I think it was Marcus who said, when Africa is strong, every African throughout the world is strong. And I think that's what I'm taking away from today. The more we are together, the happier we will be.
Wow. Beautiful, Mr. Jasper, as always.
I'm trying.
Right. Even when you beat me up, I let you know because you're so eloquent. So, I mean, look, we as Black Sox facilitated this. It was no mean feat for us, you know.
You're telling me.
Get everybody all on the same page. But we've delivered it, but in so doing, what we've done is given everyone who's taken part and everybody who's witnessed it an appetite for more.
Yeah.
And people are saying, and we know because they're jaded just like ourselves, they've seen things occur and not get anywhere. I think it's really important that we reinforce for the audience that we're serious about the long haul, and our primary role is to communicate really key information that people don't get access to. I mean, people don't realize, I think, the extent to which we're being narrowed down and closed down into our own little spaces technologically. We don't know.
We're breaking out
in Brazil.
Well, first of all, locally, let's break out of the BME box, right? So let's declare that dead as a representative category that captures our needs.
So what do we say? We say African and African Caribbean.
I think those are much better specific descriptions.
Global Africans.
Doesn't mean that we can't work in alliance with others, but it means we're specific about what our needs are. Secondly, I think that the continent itself is calling you home. It's saying, please come and assist us. And the challenge of COVID is the challenge of a lifetime, and really requires us to say, okay, let us now start using the technology for our benefit. Never mind globalizing Coca-Cola or McDonald's or whatever it is, but actually let's put connectivity. I can start to sell bicycles in Kinshasa today using mobile phone technology. I can take repurposed fridges to Egypt today using mobile technology.
I'm going to stop you there, Lee. You're going to eat up the last. Info at blacksox.com. And what we're looking for from you is your active involvement in this process. We can't do it on our own.
No.
You know, it has to be a genuinely collective activity. Let me give you a little story, because we did talk about storytelling to our guests. So 2011, get on the disturbances in the UK. People abroad could see the light of UK burning. And Al Sharpton called up and said, listen, if you need me to jump on the plane, I will be here. We're not asking you to pay for anything. We'll come over here. We'll do whatever needs to be done. If you need for you to come over to the States and get on my primetime program and popularize and make people aware of what's going on in the UK, we'll make it happen. That's true fellowship.
That's right.
And so he's genuine about what he was saying. You know, he gets a bad press, and those of us who raise our heads above the parapet
who hasn't
must be prepared to be hated. And I think that's a really important point. But he's done his work.
Absolutely.
The professor, same thing. And I urge you to go on YouTube and listen to some of the professor's speeches. They're absolutely amazing. So we're going to end on this point because we're being ushered out of this space, this slot for this program, by saying sign up so you find out about what's coming next. The next event will be on economics specifically, and we'll be doing stuff in between. We'll speak to you soon. Thank you.
Before you go, Lee Jasper Drive Time next week, Saturday between 10 and 12 on this channel. We'll be discussing domestic violence. Time for black men to open up about the realities of domestic violence.
Yeah. Shout out to Aziz and Newton, Kafiro Foundation. Where? Uganda.
Wakanda, Uganda. Okay, we're out. Are we off air?